back to the SEO Weekly, where queries are weird, advice is controversial, and everything depends. I'm your host, Garrett Sussman of iPullrank, and we've got a new report in Google Search Console for desktop versions of the page experience update. We've got ASMR for SEO. Yeah, Jamie did it. Jamie Indigo put it out there, and I'm really uncomfortable by it, but it's hilarious. And finally, Semrush buys Backlinko. Well, that's a big old cha-ching. What's going on there? What's the thought process? Let's dive in. So there wasn't a ton that happened in the world of Google this week, but one thing that came out is ahead of February's page experience update specifically for desktop, Google's trying to prepare us a little, give us some tools. So on Google Search Console, you can now look at a report about your core web vitals and your page experience specifically for desktop. So you could check those threshold metrics, which we know are on web.dev, but you can also see that right in Google Search Console, so you can now see that at scale. Super helpful. How did I know about this? Well, aside from Twitter, obviously, we put out an article on iPullrank all about the top Google developer resources that SEO should pay attention to stay up to date with SEO best practices. Now, remember last week, Mike spoke with Martin Splitt all about how there is context needed for a lot of this documentation, but you still want to know what Google's putting out there. For instance, on the Google Search Central blog, where they're putting out these updates for you to pay attention to, structured data best practices, e-commerce best practices, the webmaster guidelines kind of rebranded, as well as web.dev. It's all out there. Great article for you to walk through and see what you want to pay attention to, how search works, when it comes to Google developer resources. Starting on January 12th, Barry Schwartz was hearing some tremors in the community that Googlebot crawling was spiking. The activity was all over the place. A lot of websites saw a higher volume of crawling than normal. Now, Dr. Marie Haynes on Twitter said that she saw that from her clients. She put together a great thread that a lot of SEOs were responding to and identified how you can find it out for yourself, going to Google Search Console, going to settings, and then going to your crawl stats. Now, typically, a spike in crawl volume could have to do with a large technical change to your website. There's some conspiracy theorizing that maybe this has to do with a incoming update to the algorithm. In fact, Gianluca Fiorelli wrote that maybe Google is preparing a serious update, or that increased crawl is connected to the many rankings tremors seen all over. Meanwhile, Marie believes, she says she doesn't think we've ever really been able to connect that reduced or increased crawling is connected with ranking changes. And John Mueller chimed in a different thread from Natty from Wix that if you want to launch an update, you have to test it and prove that it's good first. You can't do that if you have to recrawl the whole web just before going live and the web is gigantic. You can't just recrawl it briefly. Crawl rate is not an early warning signal of updates. So he is saying that just because we saw this mysterious spike on the 12th, that does not indicate that a major algorithm update is coming. So speaking of Twitter threads, there was a great thread all about paywall content and SEO by Antoine Eripret. Now, Antoine is a French SEO based in Spain, and he put together this thread. He explains that if you still don't know, paywalled content is a mechanism to prevent a user from reading content without paying. Newspapers often use it to monetize their audience. The New York Times generated around 60% of its revenue thanks to its paywall data from 2017. He goes on to explain that Google doesn't like interstitials preventing users from seeing the main content. So this could be problematic because if you go to a paywall website, the interstitial will pop up, and you don't want that to crush your rankings on your SEO because the content's not visible to Google. However, Google provides documentation on how to handle that effectively. He says in the structured markup, you need to indicate which part of our content is not accessible for free. So in this example, he shows, in the code actually saying, is this content free? False. That way, Google knows that it is paywalled content and not to penalize you in terms of hiding content in any capacity. He goes on to provide a few different other techniques, but I would refer you to, Google's reference documentation of the best practices that you can find via the link in the description notes. Sophie Gibson had a great Twitter thread all about people who really want to speak at a conference but struggle to come up with the idea of what to talk about. What's going to be your pitch? What is going to be that presentation that really hooks lines and sinks your audience? Well, she put together a bunch of prompts. She wrote that, have you got talk at a conference on your goal list for this year? Are you struggling to figure out what the hell you could do a talk on? Well, I've come up with a list of prompts to help you generate talk ideas, mainly for SEO, but replace that with any sector. So shall we see what she came up with? Let's dive in. Oh, and she does have a blog post where she puts them all together that you can look at. That's in the description notes too. So first off, when someone at work comes to you for a question, what is it usually about? Basically, what do your coworkers think that you're the expert on? My coworkers want to know where the local pizza is. That's not true. We work remote. They want to ask me for good marketing tips because I'm the marketing guy at iPullrank. That's more true. That's more accurate. Okay, what piece of SEO advice annoys you because it's bad or doesn't work? In fact, our own Mike King did a whole presentation for YostCon yesterday all about best practices for e-commerce SEO that are in fact off and bad, and that the best practice should be to practice SEO. Anyway, enough about that. She came up with what topic or site part did you find hardest working on, and what have you learned about it? A little kind of internal case study situation there. What's your unpopular SEO opinion? Everyone's got an unpopular SEO opinion. One I shouted out the other day was that doing gated reviews for local SEO is not the end of the world. I don't think it's the end of the world. Transparently, I used to work for a review gating site, but firsthand didn't experience a lot of bad stuff. Local SEO friends are going to crush me on this one. What is one thing you notice loads of sites seem to get wrong in SEO? Can you talk through a better way of doing this? So if everyone's doing it the wrong way and you see something that's working, that could be the core of your presentation. What's your least favorite SEO task? Why? What would make it easier? For any of you developers or SEO engineers, we're talking automation, baby. What's an audit? We actually had one the other last week that John Murch was all about injecting search volume into Google Search Console, which is pretty cool, and he developed that, and you can see that too. Meanwhile, Jamie Indigo decided that the SEO is missing out on ASMR. We need a little more ASMR in our lives. For those of you who don't know what ASMR is, I actually don't know what that acronym stands for, but basically it's when people talk really quietly into the microphone and enunciate all the sounds. And a lot of people think that it touches on different pleasure sectors in your brain and it's really soothing. I don't find that to be the case at all. But a lot of people are really into it. Well, Jamie, what'd she do? She took the webmaster guidelines and she ASMR'd the heck out of them. Over to you, Jamie.
Webmaster guidelines. Following general guidelines will help Google find, index, and rank your site. We strongly encourage you to pay close attention to the quality guidelines, which outline some illicit practices that may lead to a site being removed entirely from the Google index or otherwise affected by algorithmic or manual spam.
So she did that. You can listen to the whole thing on YouTube. Thank you, Jamie, for bringing ASMR to the SEO community. When it comes to general SEO, Debbie Chu she had done a Twitter thread all about various link building techniques that really work in 2022, as well as ones that you should probably avoid, turned it into an awesome blog post. So she pointed out, some link building tactics that don't work well, skyscraper technique. Basically, the idea here is just, building up content that's significantly better than asking for a link. People are used to seeing that at this point, especially content managers, so it's not as effective and worth all of the resources that would go into it. Broken backlink building, so reaching out to someone saying, hey, your link is broken, why don't you use mine? I was on the other end of that as a SaaS marketer way back when, and while sometimes if the content was good, a lot of times I just find my own or better content out there and fix it myself. Not a great strategy. Buying 500 DA 50 plus links for $50, like going to Fiverr and being like, yo, how much for them links? You got any more of them links? They're not trustworthy. You don't necessarily know that the links that you're getting aren't part of some like PBN scheme, or they're just, spammy, toxic links to begin with. Not a great strategy. The ones that she does recommend, stats compilations. So getting a whole bunch of stats together. Now make sure that they're actually quality stats and that you're not curating from other curations, or know where the source of those stats are so they're actually legitimate. Data-backed research report takes a lot of work, but people love data. They love data reports. Make sure you think through your methodology, that it is makes sense and that it's accurate, because people can see through BS data. A free tool, another one that does take a lot of work, but if you have devs on your team that have built a tool, turn it into a link building opportunity. For instance, like we have Pareto at iPullrank for context parity to make sure that the content on your mobile phone is the same as your desktop, generates a lot of links for us. Guest posting does still work. Make sure that wherever you're guest posting does allow doesn't use no follows, it actually follows back, because otherwise what's the point of that link? Unlinked mentions does have value when you identify someone mentioning your name, asking them to put a link on it. A lot of like content marketers will do that, so that's effective. And then HARO, which is help a reporter out. Opportunities where basically reporters are just looking for subject matter experts to source quotes from. It's a great way to get links. I've done that in the past. Actually, B2B writers is a similar one for that, for like SaaS or B2B content. Check out the link for that. That's Elise Dobson has put that together to help B2B writers out, if that is your jam. Great article by Debbie. Keep your eyes peeled. She's a great Twitter follow as well. So Gent put out a great kind of process-focused article all around SEO and Agile. He identified 3 different ways that SEOs can work with developers to make sure their projects get across the line in an Agile format. For those of you who don't know, with Agile, kind of runs in sprints. A lot of developers do this. So you set up, you're able to be more flexible with your projects. You can break down your SEO projects into smaller deliverables and smaller iterations that allows you to iterate on those projects more effectively within the sprint format of your devs. So like every 2 weeks, you get one of your little iterations in there. Devs are much more likely to include that if it's bite-sized and not just like, do this massive project, sign the SEO team. Yeah. Don't do that. Number 2 is prioritizing high value initiatives. So we talked about this last week on Rankable with Patrick Stocks, all about how as a technical SEO, you can prioritize work. The great thing that Adam did in this article is he broke down, case studies of how he used this. So he shows the quadrant and the example of how, high value, low resource types of tasks can be prioritized, and that'll be more effective from the dev's perspective as well. And then discover tickets with developers. So basically meeting with your team of developers and talking through SEO issues that overlap with developer issues, and so they can be turned into tickets with the developer. So really like speaking the developer language. Great article by Adam, goes into depth. Definitely check that out. Appreciate it. So Jason Barnard, the brand SERPs guy, whenever you Google yourself and you're not really happy with the results and you wish it had pretty pictures and all the right information of you, well, Jason Barnard, that's his expertise. He's been studying for years how to manipulate your entity and make sure that your SERP appears the way that you want it to. He literally wrote the book on how businesses can do that for their brand SERP. So it's available as an ebook on the Kindle. Check that out. He knows brand SERPs inside out. So really excited. I started reading it. It's excellent. Jason's fantastic. So check out that book. Meanwhile, in the technical SEO world, speaking of Patrick Stocks, he put together for Hrefs blog a great little like HTTP status codes guide, the complete list. So going all the way from 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, all the different status codes, what they mean. One thing that I love is with the Hrefs SEO tool belt that you can install, it'll give you the status code for a specific URL that you're looking at. So then you can start to identify what you might want to fix. And then he gave some tips specifically with 404s, which we all care about. You don't want to leave your 404s hanging, especially if your 404 has some like backlinks going to it. If it's 404, you're not going to get the link equity value of that external link. So you want to use Hrefs, maybe identify those places that have the best, link value, and then redirect them so they turn to 301s. They're no longer 404s, and you can recoup that external link value. Yeah. So awesome article by Patrick. I love when he puts out blogs on Hrefs. Awesome. Yeah, check out the episode from Rankable last week. And then in tools and features, what would be an episode or just anything in the SEO community without mentioning Aleyda Solis? She put out a really great little kind of walkthrough on why your pages might not be ranking, whether it's technical reasons, content reasons, promotion reasons. She has a little Google Sheets that you can copy and use and work through on your own. Nice, valuable little resource by Aleyda. Appreciate that. And then big news in the SEO world, kind of out of nowhere, Semrush purchased Backlinko, which was started by Brian Dean like more than a decade ago. Brian's content is really well known. It ranks incredibly well across the board for SEO keyword terms. So Semrush, Brian's going to continue to work with the team at Semrush to build out the educational SEO content, but it's a big win for their team, big win for Brian, really happy for both. And now, when you're looking for anything SEO education related and Backlinko shows up, that is now a Semrush property. How about that? And then in the world of Rankable, yesterday I had the head of communications at Semrush, Mordy Oberstein, come on. It was so much fun. We didn't even really get to talk about General Tso's chicken. We talked about using data, SEO data, the right way, which was this idea of like data not always being these sources of truth. Specifically, we talked a little bit about search volume and why maybe you shouldn't avoid zero search volume keywords, or how you can use that sort of information directionally to point you in the right direction to inform your SEO strategy.
Let's go back to the search volume case, because when I was originally thinking about this, right, where you have the idea, well, there's no search volume, why should I even bother with this? Stop for a second. And just, to me at least, when you ask yourself, should I not write about this because there's no search volume? Does that sit well with you? Like, you're going to make a decision about what goes on your website, what you show your current users or potential users or users who came through another keyword or another pathway through social media, whatever it is, because of search volume?
Mordy's got a bunch of gems in there. Check out the episode. It was really great. And then next week, I've got Ruth Burr-Reedy is joining me. She is the Vice President of Strategy at Upbuild. We're going to talk all about managing and working in SEO teams as a distributed remote workforce. So here we are, year 2 of the pandemic. Most people are not going back to the office. I'm going to talk to Ruth all about how she runs her team, what she found to work, what's still, a challenge or a struggle. And believe it or not, she was actually a winner of the Wheel of Fortune a couple of years ago. Either way, she's going to solve that puzzle for us. And then finally, one more plug, but really excited about this. On Wednesday, our own Mike King of iPullrank is joining Bogdan Muntian of Advanced Web Ranking. We're doing a webinar all around search demand. So Mike had written an article back in 2020 about how search demand had really kind of tanked in a lot of categories and exploded in others, depending on the industry. So e-commerce going up, travel and hospitality going down, personal finance fluctuating up and down. Here we are a couple years later, and the guys are going to revisit that data to see where we stand. Has hospitality and travel search recovered? Is e-commerce still, up and to the right, or has it plateaued, or is it even going down? You can register for that free webinar. That's going to be Wednesday, January 26th at 11 a.m. I'm really excited to see what they got with the data and see what sort of like economical factors might be impacting that as we are not even completely out of the pandemic. So that's it. So many good things happened this week in SEO. Shout out to Lydia Infante. She sourced a lot of these great articles for me. I appreciate whenever I reach out to the community. I'm like, what should I cover? Because I'm looking all the time, but some things slip under the radar. So thank you to everyone who contributed. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it, comment, like it, tell me how you feel. Do you listen to ASMR? Do you hate ASMR? Tell me how you feel about ASMR. As always, appreciate you taking the time. My name is Garrett Sussman of iPullrank. This has been the SEO Weekly. We'll be back next week. Appreciate you. I will catch you on the flip side. Have a great weekend.